Hello, bonjour, marhaba. My name is Dima Ahmed. Welcome to Envisioning Palestine on Parliament Hill, an event with Vote Palestine. I'd like to start us off tonight by acknowledging that I am joining from the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is part of the Two-Row Wampum Treaty. As a Palestinian, I want to recognize that presence here on Turtle Island is that of a settler and how I privilege from residing in this colonial state. If you haven't already, I invite everyone here to take a moment after this event, go to native-land.ca and learn more about the territory you are residing in. Colonialism is not something from the past. It is sadly still very present. I invite everyone to reflect on their positionality in Canada, to learn and unlearn, connect and listen to Indigenous voices, and to go beyond land acknowledgement and incorporate ways to challenge colonialism everywhere. Vote Palestine has four main organizing contributors: the Arab Canadian Lawyers Association, Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, Independent Jewish Voices, and the Palestinian Youth Movement, all of which you'll be hearing from tonight. Additionally, we are proud to have over 75 organizations on board, along with over 1,500 individual supporters. Tonight, we're pleased to have Bisang Zubi, your NDP candidate for Kitchener Centre, to hear about her campaign experience. Additionally, we'll hear from Dr. Nadia Abu Zahra and Dr. Atif Kubursi, and a conversation with all of you. So please, we'll be hosting a Q&A once we've heard from our amazing guests tonight. So please put all your burning questions in the comments during our conversation, and we can't wait to chat with you near the end of tonight's event. So without further ado, I will pass it on to Dania Majid from the Arab Canadian Lawyers Association, and she'll outline Vote Palestine for all of you who are joining us new here.
Hello, welcome. We're so happy to have so many of you here with us tonight. We've been working together collectively as organizations individually or, with each other, on issues around Palestine for a very long time. But we noticed something very pivotal happened this year, earlier in the spring, around the uprisings in Palestine and across Palestine. And we saw an unprecedented mass mobilization and support from a cross-section of Canadians, something we've never seen before, engagement from sectors that hadn't engaged before. And we saw a lot of campaigns coming out, pushing on different issues at that time. And we also noticed that individuals were coming out and engaging their MPs directly to push back on their very weak responses to the oppressions, experienced by Palestinians, and they were demanding actions. So as a result of, this pushback, we started to see that some of positions from parties and from MPs themselves were starting to shift and soften a little bit. And some of them even went beyond their own parties to speak openly in support of Palestinian rights. And we also saw something happen that was also very pivotal, was the NDP membership who had successfully pushed through the Palestine resolution at their convention against all odds. So we were really hopeful by these signs that we were seeing. So this campaign, the Vote Palestine campaign, is really meant to, build on this grassroots momentum that we've witnessed and give both individuals and organizations tools that they can come on, endorse the Vote Palestine campaign, use the tools around questionnaires for candidates, questions, voter questions for candidates, party surveys, and do that grassroots work in the ridings to let their candidates know that they want to vote for someone who respects Palestinian human rights. So please, it's not too late. Share the campaign, endorse the campaign. If you have an organization, please sign on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dania. Next up, we have our platform outline. So I'm so happy to introduce to you from the Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, we have Michael Buchert. And from Independent Jewish Voices, we have Aaron Lakoff. And from Justice Peace Advocates, we have Karen Rodman.
Oh, sorry, that 1 second. Still a little new at this. All right, my apologies.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hey,
nice to be here.
Great to be here.
Thanks so much for being with us tonight. So I'll let you guys take it away. I'd love to let everybody know about our platform, and I'm sure they're all excited to hear it. Take it away.
Who should start?
Aaron, I'll start with you.
Sure. Okay, wonderful. Thanks so much for having me here. It's really exciting to be part of this event. My name is Aaron Lakoff. I'm the Communications and Media Lead with Independent Jewish Voices Canada. One part of our platform that I'll speak to, really touches on domestic issues rather than foreign policy. When we're talking a lot about foreign policy here, but one of the things that unfortunately we hear a lot of the times when Palestine and Palestinian human rights are brought up is we hear it conflated with anti-Semitism. And just a minute ago, Daniel was speaking to the fact that this past spring, tens of thousands of Canadians, from in cities coast to coast, were coming out into the streets in beautiful, peaceful rallies to stand up for human rights. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is in the media, a lot of the times, people who are coming out to stand up for Palestine are getting smeared as anti-Semites. And it's a very concerted effort being pushed by Jewish establishment organizations and by pro-Israel groups in order to, fight back or to counter this growing support for Palestinian liberation and Palestinian human rights. So one of the main tools, let's say, or even weapons, I think we could rightly say that they're using at their disposal these days, is a particular definition of anti-Semitism that's being put forward by the International Holocaust Remembrance Association, or the IHRA. So they have a working definition of anti-Semitism, and it's one of our platform points that we're asking candidates and parties to take a strong stance against this definition. We want candidates to fight anti-Semitism because we know that anti-Semitism is real. Especially in the Trump years in the US, we saw a huge rise of anti-Semitism in the States, and that hate trickled up across the border here. We know it's there, but there's a real danger in conflating anti-Semitism with legitimate criticism of Israel. And so this definition, and I'll keep my comments as brief as possible, the definition itself is quite mundane. In fact, we at IJV would even say it's rather toothless and kind of useless as a definition. It just says it's 2 sentences, and I'll read them right now. Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews, which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or property, towards the Jewish community, institutions, and religious facilities. So not much of an issue with the definition itself. The real problem is with this appended list of examples of so-called anti-Semitism. So there's 11 examples, 7 of which are not talking about Jews per se, but are talking about Israel. So this definition is much more concerned with protecting the state of Israel than it is about actually protecting Jews. So one of those definitions that I think is the most insidious is that it says that to call Israel a racist endeavor is anti-Semitism. And this is going to be extremely dangerous if it gets adopted as law or if it gets worked into legislation, because it will serve to silence Palestinian Canadians and really, any Canadian that's standing up and that is saying, yes, Israel should rightly be called a racist endeavor. So we're really hoping that, in this election and that beyond the election, that parties and candidates take a really, really strong stance in support of just protecting freedom of expression around Palestine. It doesn't mean that they need to support, every single thing that's being said in these movements, but it just means at a base level, they need to respect the right of Canadians to engage in boycott, divestments, and sanctions, and to criticize Israel without being smeared as anti-Semites.
Aaron, thank you so much for shedding light on all those very important points. Karen, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much. And so much my pleasure to be able to join. Karen Rodman from Just Peace Advocates. And I'm going to talk just briefly about two of the platforms in Vote Palestine that we, with other partners, have been involved in. The Vote Palestine platform includes a call for an end to Israeli military recruitment in Canada by enforcing Canada's own Foreign Enlistment Act. The Canadian Foreign Enlistment Act itself states that any person who is within Canada who recruits or otherwise induces any person or body of persons to enlist or to accept any commission or engagement in the armed forces of any foreign state or other armed forces operating in that state is guilty of an offense. And so it was on that basis that just about a year ago in October 2020, a legal complaint was provided by Just Peace Advocates and a number of other organizations to Justice Minister Lametti to undertake, and calling him to undertake, an investigation on illegal foreign recruiting for the Israeli military happening within Canada. After front page coverage in the Le Devoir in Montreal, Minister Lametti indicated the RCMP would undertake an investigation that is continuing and ongoing. Over the last year, thousands of letters have been sent to elected officials and to the RCMP. And most recently, almost 8,000 Canadians signed a parliamentary petition that was sponsored by NDP member Matthew Green in this regard, asking Canada to uphold its own domestic law. So this is an issue that's well known to elected officials, but also very much in mainstream Canadian consciousness as well. And so that is one of the reasons that we felt this was really important to put into the platform. In regard to Vote Palestine, the other platform that I will speak to is the call to suspend all bilateral trade of weapons and military services with Israel until it complies with international law. And over 50 organizations have recently joined in a call to end all trade in weapons with Israel through a two-way arms embargo and ending military security cooperation with Israel, as well as canceling the procurement that's underway for armed surveillance drones and other such actions that are underway within the Canadian government. Earlier this year, the Canadian Labour Congress also called for promoting divestment from Israeli military and security companies and on calling Canada to halt arms sales to Israel, among other measures. And the NDP itself passed a resolution in April that Dania was mentioning as we started, and part of that resolution supports suspending the bilateral trade of all arms and related materials with the State of Israel until Palestinian rights are upheld. So both of these platforms speak very much to calls that Canadians have been making to the Canadian government over the last number of months, and which have had active support from a number of elected officials in the last session of government from several parties, as well as from a broad base of support from Canadian civil society. So these are platforms that we are pleased to be bringing to the attention of the candidates that are running for parties across the country.
Karen, thank you so much for your contribution and highlighting those platform points. Michael?
Thanks, Dima. My name is Michael Buchert with Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East. One of the platform points that we have been pushing with Vote Palestine is to cancel the drone contract with the Israeli company Elbit Systems. So this is a contract that we signed less than a year ago, $36 million for a drone from one of Israel's largest weapons company. This is a drone that is supposed to be used not for military purposes, but for surveillance in the Arctic, for environmental monitoring reasons. Yet we're buying it from a company that is directly involved in the occupation of Palestine and in the daily violence against the Palestinian people. This is actually a civilian version of the exact same drones that are being used in Gaza earlier this year, as well as in 2014, to use airstrikes against the civilian population contradicting international law and contributing to terrible human rights abuses. This is what our Canadian taxpayer dollars are going to support. The bottom line, the profits of this company, is absolutely unacceptable. So we are calling on Minister Omar Al-Gabra, the transport minister, to cancel this drone contract immediately so that we are not spending our money on these death machines. We're also calling for a vote, or for Canada to start voting in support of all UN resolutions which aim to uphold Palestinian human rights. During the Stephen Harper administration, we saw a pretty drastic shift in the way that Canada was voting at the UN. It started to vote universally against motions in support of Palestinian rights, siding with only Israel, the United States, and a very small handful of countries, really isolating ourselves on the international stage. There's about maybe 16 resolutions that come up every single year. They're on a number of things related to condemning Israeli settlements, to supporting Palestinian refugees. And Canada has been voting since Harper on against almost all of these resolutions. So this changed a little bit a couple of years ago when Canada started to vote in favor of a single motion in favor of Palestinian self-determination, but voting against all of these other motions which simply affirm Palestinian rights and international law. It's a total disgrace and an embarrassment that reflects very badly on the Canadian government internationally. So we're calling for an end to this. There's a lot of other platform points that we could talk about. There's a lot of things that we're pushing officials to take on, but I think we'll leave it there for now, and you can check out the full platform at votepalestine.ca. So thank you so much, everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you, Karen, Aaron, and Michael. Next, we're going to highlight some calls to action. So all of our viewers, there's important actions that need to be, executed in order for this campaign to really reach the heights that it's capable of. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Dalia Aide from the Palestinian Youth Movement, and she's going to outline some calls to action that you can all get involved with.
شكرا ديما. مساء الخير everyone. So you've heard Karen, Michael, and Aaron all outline the platform of Vote Palestine and why this campaign is so important. So I'm going to walk you through some key action items that you can take. So the first is you can send the questionnaire to your candidates in your local ridings, or you can tag them and ask them to pledge to vote Palestine. You can also share our campaign with your networks and organizations, and you can ask them to endorse the campaign. If you meet your local candidate or you meet with their volunteers, you can ask them to answer the 4 key questions that we have outlined on our website and on our social media. You can share our posts on social media. And finally, you can donate to help us cover our costs. I won't, go into much more detail about what you can do, but you can find out more about that on the Vote Palestine website. And I'll hand it off back to you, Dima.
Shukran, Dalia. All right, so our first guest for tonight is going to be Bisan Zubi, and I'm so excited to lead the conversation about the campaign experience with her. So Bisan, a quick introduction. Bisan Zubi is a federal NDP candidate in Kitchener Centre. Bisan, a Canadian Palestinian candidate who is fluent in English, French, and Arabic, has a BA from Concordia in creative writing and political science, and an MA from Ryerson University in communications and culture. Bisan, thank you so much for your time tonight. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. Thank you for organizing this event. It's lovely to see people out and talking about this in the middle of a federal campaign.
Of course. Thank you so much for being with us. So we want to get to know a little bit more. So what made you want to enter politics, and what was your, talk to us about your process. What was that like, becoming a candidate of a federal election?
So I've been politically active for a really long time at the federal level. I worked for the NDP in my 20s. So it was always, I mean, that was my first job after I graduated from my undergraduate. So it almost seems like that was what I was kind of doing the whole time, even though I actually left politics for a while, and I worked with nonprofits, and I worked here in Waterloo region with tech companies for a while too. So it almost feels like I'm coming back to something, then I'm starting something new, but I'm definitely coming to it in a whole new way, because I have never been the candidate before, and it is definitely a different experience. I got a call in February asking me if I would consider running. And that wasn't the first time I had been asked, because I ran regionally in 2018 here in the region. And so I think people noticed after that. And so I was asked to run federally in 2019. And it wasn't the right time for me. I had just started my own business, and I just had a lot going on. And I was asked again this February, and the last couple of years were, really, really difficult. I actually got rent-evicted from my home in January. So when I received the call, I was at my parents' house in Ottawa, feeling a little sorry for myself, and trying to just figure out what was. My work was going good, but I just didn't have a home. I didn't and I was looking at all the kinds of places that were available for rent, and I was feeling like I couldn't afford to even live in my own city anymore. And so when I received, you know what I mean? There's a lot of people who are that is the issue of this election, especially in Kitchener Center. It's housing affordability in general, because the average house or the average cost of a house here in the riding has gone up over $200,000 in the last year alone. So there's a lot of young people who had considered maybe getting into the housing market and buying that are just completely priced out now. So I'm not alone. And so when that kind of happened, and I got the opportunity to advocate at this point in this time, I knew that that's what I wanted to do. So I was on board from the beginning. I kind of talked to my parents, made sure, my family, all of that stuff. I wanted to just make sure that I was, that I wasn't just saying yes, and that I was kind of speaking to the people that would also be affected by that decision. And everyone was just excited with the opportunity. And so so when you want to be a political candidate, you don't actually just get to be a political candidate. There is a process with the party if you want to run with the party. So each party is, when you're running as a slate, you are approved by the party to run. The NDP has a long list of questions, and they try and make sure that you are, that you have the political, that you have the principles of the party, right? So they make sure that, for example, you support reproductive justice, because they make sure that is, that's the kind of foundation, and that's the principle. So you do that, you submit that, and then you wait. And I waited, and I got the news back that I was approved. So that was just really exciting. And then that was in April. So, so much has happened
ever since, right? I'm sure.
Pardon me?
I said it's been a whirlwind ever since, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, especially the last, the campaign has been something else. To be honest, summer was it was a whirlwind, but it was also pretty quiet. We weren't really knocking on doors because people weren't doing that. We were in lockdown until just a month and a bit ago. So that in and of itself is, I think a lot of people are not only maybe getting involved with a political campaign for the first time on our campaign, but also leaving the house for the first time after.
There's a lot going on. There's definitely a lot going on for sure. Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. It sounds like the opportunity kind of personally and professionally kept knocking on your doors. So here it is. That's exciting. So talk to us, what are some of the challenges a first-time candidate experiences? And what are some of the ways that voters can, what can they do to help the campaigns of candidates who support specifically Palestinian human rights? Was being a supporter of Palestinian human rights an asset or an obstacle to becoming a candidate?
A lot of questions. I'm not going to remember all of them, I'm telling you.
Sure, we'll break it down. So talk to us about, your first time candidate experience, and, what can voters do to help with the campaigns of candidates specifically who support Palestinian human rights. So what are some of the things that our viewers can do to help?
Well, so as a first-time candidate, I have worked on political campaigns, but I've worked on them from central. So from the media room, I was doing political kind of communication from a central campaign. So I know the pace of an election, and I knew that, and that's a really big part of it, just knowing it's adrenaline for weeks and weeks on end. But the on the ground part is new to me. So I learned a lot, because you don't really know what you don't know until you learn it. And knocking on people's doors is, it's intimidating, and it takes a while, but then I think for me, I don't know if that's true for everybody, but I got really good at it, and I started really, really liking it, because you get to learn so much about people. And so I feel like if you're running for office and you're in politics and you actually like that process, the process of being really vulnerable and like showing up at someone's door and asking them how they're doing and what their problems are, and then listening and then trying to connect. Like if that's for you, then this is for you. But if that's not for you, then this is not for you.
There's nothing like the face-to-face conversation for sure. That's a lot different.
It's a lot different. And, I'm still out of practice too. So I'm still kind of remembering, how to make jokes that are funny and not just like
the water cooler jokes.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we're all kind of getting back into it. And volunteers have been really, really active in our campaign. We're people powered, we like to say. So we really we've had over 100 volunteers since the beginning of the writ. So we have a lot of people who've been involved. And I think the reason why we've had so many people is because we truly believe there is a role in a campaign for everybody, right? Because of course, knocking on doors is, that is the number one concern. We need to identify voters and introduce ourselves. Like people are so much more likely to vote for you if they've had a personal interaction, you know? So that is the goal, but like, that's not for everybody, and we know it, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
So there's other kinds of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. So in the lead up to the election campaign, we have seen candidates and MPs struggle reconciling their political views with those of their party. You mentioned earlier, they kind of scope you out for sure. How will you handle dissent that may come up between you and your party around policies on Palestine?
The same way I would handle any kind of, situation where somebody and I have like a difference of opinion in terms of communication. I think that what we're doing as Palestinians is really, really important, because representation is the first step to changing people's minds. And having a seat at the table and being able to advocate for these issues from a Palestinian's perspective is a lot of mind changing in and of itself, right? So I don't want to necessarily like preclude the fact that just having somebody there will make such a difference, because nothing, about us without us, right? And we are really at a moment where Palestinian voices are being respected more. We still have a lot of work to do. I think we all kind of know, the work that's ahead of us. But I think that the only thing that can come of having people like me in a caucus, and not just me as a Palestinian, but I think of Leah Ghazan, who's Indigenous, and she is just led the NDP on our Indigenous policies, like a million light years ahead of where they would have been, because she was able to advocate from experience, speak from a place of knowledge that was lived, and work within our party's abilities to actually get the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples passed through the House of Commons, right? So, started with Romeo Saganash in the NDP a long time ago, but that work had to happen through representation and through voices taking the lead where other voices could not or would not, right?
Yeah.
So I think that that's the process of politics. That's why I'm running in a party. I want to move party policy forward, not just on Palestine, but on climate change and on the economy and on like an inclusive economy and women's issues, right? So I think that that is the goal. That's always the goal, is to propose something better. And as long as you're doing that, you really are actually pushing forward, new ways of thinking.
Absolutely. And you, as a female Palestinian candidate, how important was the passing of the Palestine resolution at the NDP convention in shaping the party's election platform and shaping their views on Palestinian human rights?
I can't speak to the internal kind of workings of the party because the platform was kind of created without me. But I know that that was a big moment within the party. I know that the repercussions of that and positive repercussions of that were felt within the party. I think this was one of the first times a lot of Palestinians saw a federal party advocating for us. You know what I mean? Advocating to respect our human rights and the right to just live freely and not under oppression and under occupation. And so we actually saw action coming from a federal party. And that was just, I think, such a significant moment for young people. When I'm thinking about, I have so many young Palestinians who are volunteering on my campaign because they see the NDP as a party that's safe for them, like as a party where they could actually maybe run one day and they can volunteer and they don't have to worry about having to bite their tongue or not say something or tell people that they're not Palestinian or you know what I mean? Like all the things that we kind of learn implicitly in Canadian culture of how to hide being Palestinian, that this could be the place where being Palestinian could be a positive for you. You could be accepted and loved for that.
And on that note, what are your priorities on Palestine that you would like to work on if elected, and why?
To be honest, I think that what we need to be doing here from Canada is talking about how Canada's domestic policy and colonialism is really impacting our ability to be a global voice on anything. I'm a Palestinian and I'm very comfortable advocating for domestic Canadian policies and how Canada kind of is in the global world because of that hypocrisy of what's happening here in Canada right now, with the way we treat Indigenous communities, with the way police profile Black communities and racialized communities and Muslim communities. We have things that are internal to Canada that are really, really toxic. That I think we have no business really trying to tell other countries how to be and do until we figure that out and until we are less hypocritical. But I think that looking outwards, like as a Palestinian, what I hope to do is to normalize being Palestinian and having these perspectives and not having it be seen as anything other than representation that is good, that is healthy, that is, that I can contribute to a conversation about peace and justice, both domestically as well as internationally, that we can actually stand as an ethical, moral, global voice. Those are all really, really great ambitions for Canada to have. But definitely from a federal perspective, we have a lot of work to do. And so it's a really long menu of things that I am going to want to change. And Palestine is definitely, I want to advocate for Palestine, but I know within my role, we can't go and expect to be a part of a real solution for peace until we have come to terms with our own genocide and our own history here in Canada.
Absolutely. Bisan, thank you so much for your time today. It was so lovely to hear from you. And please tell everybody where they can find you online.
Yeah, so I am the NDP Member of Parliament candidate in Kitchener Centre. If you don't know, Kitchener Centre is one of the only ridings in Canada, if not the only riding in Canada, without a Liberal candidate. He has been ejected for bad behavior, and we have an open race ahead of us. So it is a really, really exciting time to be here, and it's a really exciting time to be on our team and advocating for us. So bisanzubi.ca, that's the website. You can get involved. You can find out more about me. But you can also join our team. We only have a week left, so we're doing that final push to really turn this seat orange, which we think is very much possible.
Well, thank you so much for taking time out of, I know it's time, like it's crunch time now. So
it is a little, but it's good. It's always important. It's a responsibility, right? Like I'm the only Palestinian here in this federal campaign, and it's really important for us to keep talking and to be visible and to keep pushing, our issues with pride. So I'm not knocking on doors, but I'm still doing what I think is a really important part of the work.
Yeah. Absolutely. Bisan, again, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And have a great night. Thank you. Next up, Bisan. Next up, we have Reflections of Palestine in Politics. I'm going to have Dania Majid from the Arab Canadian Lawyers Association introduce Dr. Nadia Abu Zahra and Dr. Atif.
Thanks so much, Dima. And sorry, I'm trying to multitask the platform and the panel at the same time, so bear with me. Yes, we're really so fortunate to have two really great minds with us tonight to talk politics on Palestine. First, we have Dr. Atif Kurbasi, who is a professor emeritus of economics at McMaster University, and he is also president of Econometric Research Limited. And the bio goes much longer, but this is the short version of his accomplishments. And we also have Dr. Nadia Abu Zahra, who is an associate professor in the School of International Development and Global Studies at the University of Ottawa, and is a member of the Human Rights Research and Education Center. So welcome to you both, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So we've heard a lot of information, we touching upon Palestinian politics from our coordinating partners and from Bisan as a candidate. Any first impressions, kind of from the commentaries we've received so far, that kind of struck you about, sort of Canada's role in Palestine, and also the experiences of a first-time candidate who happens to be Palestinian?
Well, let me begin by saying that all we're really doing here, all what our candidate is asking for, is for political parties and for our candidates and for the voters to respect and uphold Canadian values. We're asking for two very simple things. First, to protect, promote the human rights of the Palestinians, their ability to move freely, their ability to exercise their inalienable right to govern their destiny, their ability to keep their homes, their ability to protect their families. And at the same time, we're only asking that Canada works, promotes, protects, and implement international law. I mean, how could you be more Canadian than being for human rights, especially of people who have been oppressed, they're under occupation, an illegal occupation, and asking for the simple application of international law and international humanitarian law. Palestinian kids, hundreds of them are in prison. Homes are being demolished. People are evicted from homes that they've owned and lived in for decades. The Palestinians are unable to benefit from their natural resources. They're being expropriated, whether it's land, water, their olive trees are being plucked. So what we're asking, very simple, and we're asking the Canadian voters and the Canadian candidates to uphold Canadian values, to respect Canadian principles that they apply every place in the world and ask others to adhere to. Why not the Palestinian? Why should the Palestinian be different than anybody else?
Mm-hmm. Natty, did you have any thoughts?
Well, I think two things.
Opening thoughts?
I think that Professor Qabursi has talked very much about the platforms of political parties to represent all people who are voting in these and all elections within Canada. And so I think that's one aspect, which is the platforms of the political parties. But the other aspect is Bissem Zarbi herself and what she just described. And two things struck me about what she was saying. One of them is she was saying, we're asking for simple representation. We're asking for, one Palestinian to be a member of parliament in thinking very closely about the immediate community of Kitchener-Waterloo. She wants to show that she is a vibrant part of this community. And I think, that's really important, to be born and raised on this land and to be among community. I think it's very important to feel that we can be a part of politics. We can be a part of collective decision making that represents, our societies here. So that's one. I think the other thing is that, understanding Palestinian roots is also understanding our unrootedness on Turtle Island. And so she's also describing the responsibility to think decolonially and to think instead, on whose territory are we? And without earlier communicating with the people whose territory that is. So for instance, where I sit at the moment is unceded Algonquin territory. And so, it's, if I were to be thinking politically in this region, I would be thinking about being a settler or apolitically, just thinking as someone who lives and breathes and walks on this place. I think it's really crucial. And Bissem is bringing that forward to say, well, first and foremost, we have to recognize our situation as settlers here before we can talk about, policy toward other Indigenous nations elsewhere. We have to first focus on decoloniality here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite often surprised. Our Prime Minister, other party leaders and candidates who always say we share values with Israel. I always like to ask, what values do you share with them? I mean, do you share with them the fact that you're a colonial or have acted as a colonial power, that you have suppressed the indigenous people, that you have violated international law, that you have really been oblivious to your responsibility under the United Nations Charter to protect the rights of people, the human rights, the basic human rights? Look, I mean, Canada violates international law. It's trades with the settlements. This is in its political stature. Canada has rejected the occupation of Palestinian land, whether it's Jerusalem, other places, or has treated them and declared them as illegal occupation. So how could you be illegal occupation and you extend the free trade agreement with Israel to cover products coming from this settlement? The Europeans have been very blunt about it, very clear, and have declared that any product that comes from these settlements does not fall within the agreement with Israel and the European Union, that this is an illegal trade, this is an illegal transaction, and people challenged it, and the European Court reviewed it and came on the side that this is an illegal activity, illegal transaction. Any dealing with the settlements literally is an illegal and in contravention of international law.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that, you know, in our conversations amongst ourselves, but also the many, I mean, we have probably, like, I think at this point, like 1,500 plus endorsers who've signed the pledge and have written comments to us about why they want to see, you know, their candidates speak up. You know, everyone seems to understand these issues, but politicians do not. So where's the disconnect? You know, we see the mass mobilization, we've seen the polls, you know, expressing support for Palestinian human rights. And it's not just Arabs, right? We're not talking about a small demographic, we're talking a cross section. We've seen the mass uprising, as I mentioned, in the spring. But yet we see very little action from government officials. And you know, this is one thing that I think all of us struggle with is, you know, how many more petitions can you, like, you know, how can you receive 100,000 plus signatories to petitions, but still Palestine, you know, no discussion on foreign policy. Even in the debates, the only question on Palestine was posed to Anna May Paul, and it was in regards to the implosion of her, you know, of her party on that question. But you know, we see the Conservative Party actually, you know, adopt a Donald Trump policy to say, you know, in light of all we know about Donald Trump and his policies, no, I'm still going to move the embassy to Jerusalem. And that's what he's really come out, you know, in regards to on Palestine. So where is the disconnect? Why can't, you know, why aren't politicians seeing, you know, this movement grow and grow, but and not react to it in a way that, you know, reflects the growth?
If I may, this may sound very predictable, but I have to think of the education that I received as I was growing up, you know, and I really do believe that to fully understand the operation of political parties and their responses to an electorate, you know, because I do see if we change as an electorate, if what the people want and say changes, eventually, perhaps not immediately, but I do think that political parties must have some sensitivity to what the people want. And I hear what you're saying, that the people have been very, you know, clear. There have been, you know, mass mobilizations all over in small towns, in large cities. We've seen it for many years, you know, at least 20 years, we've been witnessing people literally in the streets trying to raise their voices and to say, this is what we want. And we have seen the non-response from political parties. However, we've also seen that political parties can respond to public opinion from time to time. And therefore, I return to, again, the kinds of education that we're receiving growing up. And so we're receiving an education until recently that did not acknowledge colonialism that is ongoing right here, right now. And so therefore it becomes extremely difficult to fully understand colonialism happening elsewhere, ongoing right here, right now. Yeah. And to understand, unfortunately, that settler Canadians not only play a part in colonialism here, but also internationally. And so I do think it comes down to, frankly, the songs we sing in our schools, the children's games that we play, and I'd love to see those change. I would love to see far more understanding of not only First Nations culture, but, you know, rights and the concept of what is colonialism and how does it continue to take place. Because in the understanding that a lot of kids had when I was growing up, it was over. Colonialism was over here and it was irreversible. And there was no notion of an Indigenous future here, let alone an Indigenous future internationally in Iraq, in Palestine, in Kashmir, and elsewhere. And so I'm hoping that in education it will change, and therefore the electorate will change, and therefore one day political party platforms will come to understand the true path to justice and to well-being.
There are multiple disconnects. There is not only one disconnect. One disconnect is with our values. Our values say that we respect human rights, international law, and even at one time we were arguing that international law should really be part of Canadian jurisprudence. There is disconnect with the rank and file of many parties who have demonstrated, voted, voiced their concerns, have asked and demanded that there would be a more responsive and responsible treatment of political issues involving the Palestinians. There is a disconnect with our rhetoric. I mean, if you look at the website of the External Affairs, they are very clear about Israel being in violation of international law, about Israel is an illegal occupation, that Israel is trespassing the rights of the Palestinians. But how on earth you could speak on one place in one way and then speak completely the opposite way when you become into the real politique of things. And I'm very happy with what Dr. Nadia was talking about, is that we're not only talking about politics, we're talking about values, about education, about the way we conceive ourselves, the way we project ourselves, our hypocrisy and our truthfulness to ourselves and to our candidates and our voters and our leaders. This is a time where we really need to reconnect, and reconnect in a way that preserves the integrity of the political process and the very basis of what democracy is all about. If people want something and have voiced their position on it, this is an implicit, and I don't want to be, stepping on your toes, Dania, as a lawyer, but there is indeed here a contract between the voter and the representative, and that any dismissal or disregard of this implicit contract is a major violation of the democratic process.
Mm-hmm. So, looking at this, sort of big picture, because I know sometimes it's very hard. You focus on the moment and the time, and you miss a lot. So if we were to zoom out a little bit and sort of look at the trajectory of Palestine in politics, where's the trajectory going? Is this a moment of optimism where we are? We can point towards things where we are starting to see some of the fruits of our labor, or is it a time of concern where we're also seeing a lot of frightening things happening, from the environment. Like we seem to be going backwards on many other issues that are also important to us. So in your view, and I know it's a little bit crystal balling it, but kind of taking a bigger view, where are we on the trajectory on Palestine and politics in Canada?
I think we have made a major step forward, which is that we have finally established publicly, internationally, and particularly among the electorate in Canada and Turtle Island. I think we now understand that people who are advocating for justice in Palestine are advocating merely for justice. And so the word pro-Palestine, pro-Palestinian, we have finally been allowed to see that word drop from discourse and to see pro-justice, pro-equality, pro-human rights, pro-fairness, pro-indigeneity, and to better understand that this is actually not an issue for people who are born to certain parents or born in certain locations. This is an issue for everyone who cares about freedom. Basic freedom. Because if someone's freedom is restricted in these ways with certain technologies, it's only a matter of time before those practices and those technologies are applied to another people and another people and another people. And we are witnessing that. And it is extremely frightening to understand how private security companies translate from one location to another, seamlessly changing their targets. And in the end, everyone is going to be affected by these negative forms of interaction between human beings. We need to stop them when they start. We need to identify them anywhere in the world and to say, no, this is no way to treat a human being. And I don't care if that human being is living in Kashmir, or if that human being is living in Palestine, if that human being is living in Venezuela, Guatemala, wherever that person happens to be, we need to stand up and say that is not a way to treat a human being. And I'll repeat myself, that is not a way to treat a human being in Turtle Island. You know, we witness and we are complicit to injustices that are happening here. And so we must stand up for injustice everywhere. And you know, to paraphrase the greats, injustice everywhere is really the issue. And I think that's why we've moved forward. Finally, this, you know, we are not being branded as being tribalistic, as being narrow, as being focused on something that does not affect what's happening here. And there is a growth in understanding. So we're seeing a Black Lives Matter protest talking about Palestine, and we are seeing a Palestine protest talking about Black Lives Matter. And that's just one quick example of the incredible solidarity that we are now beginning to see across movements. It's not an accident, and it can never be assumed, but it is slowly cultivated and built through healthy relations, through relations of equality, of horizontality. And that is the kind of thing we really need to see more of, whether it's in the parliament or outside of the parliament. That's the kind of thing we can start on a micro scale, but also with an understanding of it affecting the way in which we envision the place that we call home.
Yeah, I'm very optimistic. Last year, things have happened in a way I have not really seen it before. The way people have voted with their feet and have come and spoke openly and in large numbers. One thing that I agree totally with Nadia is that human rights are indivisible. You cannot be free in Canada when other human beings are not free, and especially affected by policies and practices and positions and votes that you are committing in Canada. So in some sense here, and Mandela was absolutely right, that I cannot feel to be totally free in South Africa, and that I have escaped apartheid as long as the Palestinians remain under a regime of apartheid. And that this indivisibility of human rights, the indivisibility of human dignity, the indivisibility of our responsibility to protect human rights wherever they are, as if they are our own, I think this is absolutely a new discourse, and it's becoming to be very powerful, and we can count on it. And then count also the fact that several human rights organizations, from the Human Rights Watch and others, who have for the first time had the guts and had the moral fortitude to stand up and say, Israel is practicing apartheid. It's a regime that has completely treated the Palestinians as inferior and has subjugated them and have robbed them of their rights, and trying to rob them of their dignity but have failed. But this is a point where we assert our dignity by asserting the dignity of the Palestinians.
Absolutely. I think, you know, one thing that, you know, when we reflect on this moment of time too, is how different movements of justice and liberation have, you know, relied on one another, supported one another, and created paths for one another. And, you know, and I think critical to that is, you know, the removing of fear of speaking out on one's taboo issues. And, you know, when we can speak about gay rights, or we can speak about Indigenous rights or Black rights, and we remove the taboo from that, you know, from the, you know, those topics, other topics, we are also able to say free Palestine without fear, and we need to continue to do so. So my final question to you both, and again, it requires you to maybe pull out that crystal ball again, is what happens on September 21st? You know, you know, do you have any predictions? But you don't have to give them to us if you don't, or you do. But what you know, we spend a lot of time as Canadians focused on vote election day, and we think democracy is an act of putting a ballot in a box, when in fact the real work and a real democracy is about what happens the day after the election and in between elections. So, you know, we talked about disconnect and a lot of points of disconnect. You know, what should be you know, what should those who endorse the Vote Palestine campaign, the groups who work on this issue, what should the focus be, or what are the points of reconnection that we need to focus on, come September 21st, to make sure that Palestine gets back on the agenda in a principled manner?
If you want me to start, I'm an economist, and I'm not afraid to make predictions.
All right.
We predicted 9 of the last 5 recessions, so our record is not great. But I definitely see that they're going to be a minority government, and it may not be on the 21st. It could be the 23rd, 24th,
Right.
given the way we're going. But the story is very important here, and what I would like to emphasize here, and it's very crucial, that what we are working for, what we should be working for, what we should continue to work for, is not just a one single shot for one election. This is a platform. This is a commitment, a moral commitment, and should remain a guiding principle, and should motivate us to continue to struggle, to educate our fellow citizens, to voice our concerns, and to speak for justice, not to remain indifferent or to mute our voices or accept those who try to mute our voices. I mean, those who are really trying to conflate our criticism of Israel and its trespasses and its infractions of international law as anti-Semitism is itself a very vicious and malicious way. And we should stand up and remain vocal and loud in our condemnation of injustice, wherever it is, and that we are motivated here to continue our work and our efforts. And that is really the least we can do as human beings and as true Canadians, because Canadians have a responsibility as they speak and project themselves as people for peace and justice, is to remain continuously committed and to be vocal in these things.
If we have time, I'll speak, but I think we're out of time, no?
No, we can definitely squeeze you in, Nadia. Don't worry.
Well, I would say what matters for me, honestly, is every person watching this. Every person who enters with a particular point of view and walks out hopefully with a different one, or, because it's always good to learn something new, always, and I think it's actually good to have lots of different perspectives and lots of different viewpoints. I think it's good to have that diversity and to always be learning from one another. So I think what really, really matters is not for me so much, which government will be in power for the next few years, or which interesting conglomeration will be in power for the next few years, but instead thinking much, much more long term and thinking, how is our society or our societies, how are we going to really think of our futures and think perhaps of a future that is far more, for lack of any other word, far more decolonial. That I want to think beyond, a government that's allied with a military industrial complex that engages in, destructive practices to our earth, to our relations. I want to think beyond that. I know that in the short term, that is what we have, no matter which party is going to be in leadership. But I think in the longer term, we can all work to change that. Just as we hope that settlers in Palestine will wish for justice fervently, I hope that settlers like me in Turtle Island will wish for justice fervently here and everywhere.
Well, thank you so much, to the both of you for those insights and commentaries on contemporary Canadian politics and where we go from here after the election. I'm sure this conversation will continue, and I think we need to have a lot more to make sure that we can figure out how to best mobilize and put pressure on the elected officials who do make it to Parliament Hill to keep their pledges if they've made pledges, and if they claim to support human rights, then hold them accountable to that claim. So, we definitely encourage those watching, to keep in touch, follow the partners, the coordinating partners for the work to come, because the real work happens always after the election. So thank you very much. And then, we're gonna keep you on, and I'm gonna add everybody else on, and Dima will lead the Q&A if we have any questions from the audience.
Thank you so much for that really engaging conversation. There's a lot of great takeaways. So we actually have a question that can be posed to all three of our awesome guests tonight. So from what Professor Nadia and Atif communicated, and as well as Bisan, it sounds like there is a need to have solidarity with other marginalized communities when we organize. What advice do each of you have on how that can best be done? So I'll let Bisan take it away first, and then we can kind of move
So
I
would just say I'm still solidarity in action, but in motion, because I'm still figuring it out. I think it's a lifelong kind of learning process. And so this has been a really kind of deep experience, just even being in a political campaign, and understanding that as member of parliament, like within the colonial system that I'm running within, it's in nation to nation negotiation with Indigenous peoples has to happen at that federal level. So a part of me is feeling like I get to take myself into that colonial system as somebody who has that perspective and be able to impact it in that way. And that's just really exciting. But I think that we have a lot of tools available to us, right? There's a lot of things that might not have seemed possible just, even a year ago. But to be honest, I feel really accepted. I feel like in this campaign, I have been able to be myself. I know that when I win, it will be different. It will be heated up, and there will be a lot kind of more focus. And I look forward to that as well, because I really think that we have an opportunity to actually change the narrative and use solidarity as a rallying cry to other groups that might not have understood us before, right? Really taking advantage of the moment of more questions are being asked, and more people want change and results. And those people are maybe people who are more comfortable, right? And they're not necessarily the ones who were used to asking for change. So there's a lot of kind of tangible stuff there. So I've been really honored to actually be able to work with like local Indigenous leaders in terms of understanding what my role would be in this process of decolonizing. Kitchener Center is located on the Haldeman Tract, which is a really kind of interesting analogy to Palestine, in that it's land that was promised and then taken away over time again. And so you have that kind of double bind of how it can be, how the land of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee was then given to the Haudenosaunee, the Six Nations of the Grand River, after they fought for Canada in the U.S. Civil War. That was a tract of land that was promised to them as land that would be for these families generationally. It was their land, and throughout the years, through the state being the state and settlers coming in and taking over land, that amount of land like reduced. And you see the image and that graphic of Palestine that keeps being shared. And there's that Canadian analogy and the Canadian one of Indigenous lands that then kind of shrink into, spattering. And so that is a really powerful feeling. Like that is a really interesting kind of way of seeing outside myself and my experience and understanding maybe the other side. And having been born in Canada, I am a settler, and I am a child. Like I am that. I am not a immigrant or a refugee. I am Canadian through and through. Even if my parents or my brother aren't, I am. So there's a lot there, and it's still like a journey for me. I'm still learning how that kind of works, and I'm still like learning the language around it and how to build solidarity through that. But I think it's so interesting how so many connections are there and so many shared experiences are there if you kind of are able to pull them out. So that's maybe not exactly as a practical kind of thing, but just from what I've been experiencing over the past little while, has been a really transformative experience for me.
Absolutely. Professor Osliff and Professor Nadia, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the whole argument, our discourse here is rooted into the indivisibility of human dignity and human rights and freedom. And it's about respect of the law. I mean, we're not a one single issue here. Whenever we talk about Palestinian human rights, we're talking about human rights. And whether this applies to Palestinians, our natives, or any group, that commonality is fundamental. And for us, there is no division here. And this calls for definitely a solidarity, a strong and not just rhetorical, but really meaningful and existential collective struggle towards the establishment of and the protection of human rights and respect of human beings. One thing that is also quite evident here is that the discourse that Nadia was talking about is anti-colonial. And in this respect, the struggle of the Palestinians is the struggle of every group, every suppressed, every oppressed. It's basically a yearning for freedom and for the full rights of people, regardless of who they are, what ethnicity, what orientation. It's that collective justice that is indiscriminate in its discourse, that everybody is equal.
Absolutely, absolutely. Professor Nadia?
I think that it is really important to build solidarity, and I very much appreciate the way you describe that as a lifelong process, Bisan. Thank you so much. I want to draw attention to some of the less palatable parallels, and I want to talk about impunity. And, you know, it was reported in the Los Angeles Times just, you know, on Friday, that a 15-year-old boy who had gone out with his friends was taken by settlers and hung from a tree, beaten with clubs, and the soles of his feet were burnt. Yeah. And this kind of thing actually happens often. You know, I can tell you far more. You know, this boy survived. This 15-year-old boy survived. I can tell you the stories of ones who did not survive, and many of them are only made public because they have a tie to some other place and so on. But you know, this sort of thing happens with impunity on a regular basis, and it happens here too. You know, we know about the Bushi case. You know, we know that he was shot. We know the words that were said at the time, and we know what happened to the perpetrators. And so this level of impunity that is a frightening disrespect for human life and for all our relations is something that cannot continue. And so somehow we have to build, there's no choice but to build solidarity. And there is no choice but to turn away from this path that is leading to these kinds of acts happening more and more frequently. You know, we cannot let them continue, and for humanity to come to this, right?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So we're going to take one more question. How do we break free from the two-state solution narrative in conversation in Canadian politics? So I'm actually going to open this up to the floor, and I'd love to hear from actually everybody's perspectives on how we do that.
I'd like to ask, what two states are we talking about?
fair question. Bisan, do you have anything to add?
I mean, there is one state, maybe a quarter of a state, and it's Swiss cheese, and the occupier is still in control of the resources, of the livelihood, of the lives of the people. And any talk about a two-state, let's begin with Canada. For the first time, have a chance. They were asked, recognize the Palestinian representative here as representative of Palestine. They continue to talk about Palestinians, but they never accept the word Palestine. How could you possibly talk about two states when you refrain and you do not accept and you do not recognize Palestine as a state?
Well, that was a pretty strong note to end on. I think maybe we'll leave it there unless Bisan would like to add anything.
I feel like for me, I don't want to preclude what the end of what peace looks like. Mm-hmm. Like, I just don't think we know any better than anybody if we come to the table with open hearts and we try and figure out how does everybody live freely with full rights. Whatever that solution is, it could be 12 states. You know what I mean? Like, we don't need to say what is and isn't before we even come to the table as partners for peace, for justice, for accountability and transparency. Those are the things that will bring us to a solution that I don't think we in this state right now have very much information about.
Absolutely, holding up the mirror, that's for sure. Thank you so much, everybody. Oh, sorry, did I miss something? Go ahead.
You missed Dalia, sorry.
Oh, Dalia, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, it's okay. I was just going to say that I think the shift from the two-state solution narrative is a shift to a conversation about justice. And if we are talking about justice for all Indigenous peoples, it's clear what that will look like here on Turtle Island, in Palestine, and elsewhere in the world. So really, we need to shift our narratives to talk about not just peace, but peace and justice. So the marginalized communities and peoples of the world are getting what is rightfully theirs, which is living their lives with basic human dignity, which is all anyone is asking for here, is justice. Thank you.
All right, mic drop. Thank you so much, Dalia. I really appreciate that closing remark. We'll leave it there. Thank you so much for everybody's time tonight. We really appreciate every single one of you that took time out of your schedules to be here with us and have this really important conversation. I just want to reiterate, we've had just over 27 candidates from 3 different parties pledged to our platform since the kickoff of the campaign trail. We encourage any candidates watching with us today, here with us today, that we want to hear from you. Please visit our website. You can see it on the screen for the full candidate questionnaire. Additionally, as a voter, if the candidate in your riding is not on our pledge list, please visit our website and ensure that you email them the questionnaire. We'd like to hear from all candidates. Please consider the action items we heard from Bisan Zarbi on how you can all support the candidates that pledge to advocate for Palestinian human rights on Parliament Hill this election. And thank you all to all our contributing members, our guests, and our audience for being with us tonight. Good night. تصبحون على خير.
تصبحون على خير.
يلا مع السلامة.